Hello, I'm Aoife Clifford and I'm an author. When We Fall is a literary crime fiction. It centres on Alex, who is at the crossroads of her life, really. She's recently divorced and her career as a barrister is not going great. And in the midst of all this, she gets a call to go visit her mother, who has been recently diagnosed with early dementia. And she's kind of grappling with all of this at once and feeling quite overwhelmed. Her mother and herself have been very good at keeping each other at arm's distance and being independent women from each other. And so neither of this is going to be a comfortable visit. For neither of them, I should say. So they kind of avoid talking about the topic, which is they need to get Denny either into assisted care or they need to get her more help, and decide to go for a walk along the beach. And when they're down on the beach, they find a severed leg and the adventures begin. When We Fall is my third novel. I've written two others, All These Perfect Strangers and Second Sight. Both of them are also literary crime novels. And I've also had quite a few short stories published here and overseas. My publisher for When We Fall is Ultimo Press. It's always a bit hard to go back and kind of retrofit where all the bits came from. But at the start of this, what I like to do is grab a few ideas that are totally unrelated to each other and kind of push them together and see the chemistry that come from them. So actually, I'd have to say I'm a part-time bookseller, and one of the ideas for this book came from a customer. Now, as the wonderful people at Leaf Books would know, that you kind of get two lots of customers who walk through the door. One who is passionate about books, and that would be the majority of people who are big readers, love words. But sometimes you get people who aren't big readers, but they've got another passion and they come to get books about that. And one day in my bookshop, someone came in who was passionate about fashion. Now, I'm not very interested in fashion, but I love hearing other people's passions. And so I was kind of asking questions about it. And we started talking about books about fashion and about designers that she loved. And we started talking about one particular dress that she was obsessed with. And it was a dress that she had seen 15 years before in a shop in Melbourne in the window. And she'd loved it so much that she had actually gone and found it in a magazine, and she'd cut it out of the magazine. 15 years later, she'd moved houses 3 times, and she still had that one now crumpled up picture of the dress that she always wanted to know the story behind it. What happened to that dress? Who had worn it? And I was absolutely gobsmacked because the dress she described was my wedding dress. So I was able to finish the story for her and tell her what had happened to it. We couldn't believe that it was such a coincidence that 15 years later we were talking about the same dress. So I brought a picture in the next week and she came in and sure enough it was the same dress. And so I had kind of solved a mystery of her, a little mystery she'd been carrying around in her life, but she'd given me a great idea for a book, which would be, what if you're a words person, sort of like I am, like my main character is. I've got a law degree and she's a barrister. And you end up in a world that's so visual, and you end up having to solve a mystery where all the clues are visual. And so that's one of the things I was really interested in exploring in this book. So it starts off, as I described earlier, that it has a severed leg on the beach, but the severed leg has a tattoo on it, and that tattoo becomes very important. Not just in identification, but also then suggesting, why did that person get that tattoo? What was the story behind that tattoo? And the story behind that tattoo is kind of the mystery that will get unsolved in the book. So it was great fun. I really loved doing it. So there are great Dutch masters in the book. There's architecture. There's photos that tell stories. There's everything from scribbles to major beautiful works of art. All of them have got a story sitting behind them that needs to be pieced together by a poor person who really hasn't thought much about art at all. So I really enjoyed that. Okay, so my first lucky dip question is, best 2 pieces of advice for getting published. That's a very good question. Writing is a tough business, and I was lucky that I headed into it having written a lot of short stories, because what short stories taught me is beginnings, middles, and the most important of all, ends. And when you're writing, particularly if you're writing a first novel, you think it'll never end and you'll never get there. And a lot of people kind of will give up on the way. But I always knew that the end was in sight. And that was a really great discipline for me. It also, short stories, and this is my second piece of advice, is it taught me to send them out into the world no matter whether the world was totally indifferent to them. And a lot of people have novels sitting in their drawers and no one's ever going to read it if it's sitting in your drawer. So put it out there. For most people, it's not their first novel that gets published, but you learn a lot of process stuff with everything that you write, no matter whether it's successful or not. And this is I'm going to give a third piece of advice, is have your own definition of what success is. For me, I have to be happy with the work that I put out there. And that's the most important thing. Everything else after you put the work out is beyond your control. And so you just have to kind of surf the highs, cope with the lows, and just keep on going. And it's a great ride. So it's a really awesome journey. So I really would encourage people to give it a go. I'm not a full-time author. I'm a part-time bookseller as well. I started writing first and then got into bookselling. It's something that I really enjoy because you get to spend, in my case, a couple of days a week talking about books, and more importantly, other people's books, which is a really joyous experience. As all bookshops do, you have wonderful customers that come in, tell you about what they're reading, and then you end up reading it as well. I found some of my favourite books ever from customer recommendations. And it also allows you to look at books as a whole. It gives you a lot of experience and understanding about how the publishing process works, the good parts of it, the not so great parts of it. And I'm just delighted to be part of a bigger, quite vibrant industry that is really going places in Australia. And I think in particular in the last 5 years, the stories that we're hearing from through Australian books is better than ever. Who helped me get my book to the finishing line? Quite a lot of people, it must be said. I mean, writing is a fairly solitary affair. And this one did feel more solitary because it was done in lockdown. So there wasn't kind of the same interactions that you'd have with writing friends and discussion that you normally do about talking about your project. For this particular case, for my third novel, my agent was sensational. She really took the role of an early editor for me because I didn't necessarily have that feedback that I would normally get from friends reading. I had other friends read too. A really great author, Tanya Chandler, read it at some stage and gave me very helpful advice. But my agent, Claire Forster at Curtis Brown, was sensational because she really, no one found lockdown particularly easy. No one found 2020 a good year to be in. And she kept me going and had confidence when I did not have confidence. And so she was crucial. My book is crime fiction. I call it literary crime fiction, but that kind of can be a bit of how do you judge that? And I realise sometimes you don't really realise what you're writing until after you've finished the book and can look at it as a whole. And I realise I'm as greedy as writer as I am a reader. So for this, there were 3 things that were important in the book. And so it was to have a country town that was a convincing country town that you could believe people would want to live in, to have characters that were well-rounded and that you could recognise from life, to have a commentary about social issues and about the world that we are experiencing. In particular for me, it was a couple of issues around an exhibition that I saw about forced adoptions, and about exploring historical wrongs being done and suddenly coming to the surface years later. I'm always fascinated by kind of truths being overthrown and new truths being discovered, or new old truths really. And then the third thing is I do love the puzzle of crime fiction. I love the being the armchair detective and trying to guess what happens next. And is that a clue or is that a red herring? I love that too. And I really wanted to have a book that had all three in it because they're the books I love to read. Uh, well, probably quite late, really. I'm not one of those people who ever expected, like, that was their trajectory in life, that they always knew. And I have writing friends who knew from the start that they wanted to do it. It was always something I was interested to give a go to, but I didn't start doing it until I was at home with small children and had a New Year's resolution to write a short story because I could feel bits of my brain beginning to disappear and atrophy. And so I guess that was the start of it. But it wasn't probably until my first novel got published that I actually kind of considered myself a writer. Who gets to read my first draft? Look, the real thing is no one gets to read my first draft because I am a writer that has very messy first drafts. I've realised that the way I work is it's like I'm kind of swimming in the ocean and I'm just grabbing ideas and trying to push them together and see if I can kind of make a raft. And at the stage that I then can kind of strap them together and hop up on them and go, yep, I've got something here. And then it's the whittling process. And to be honest, so I'm someone who I've got very messy first drafts. They're awful. I know they're awful, so no one else needs to see them. So once I've got them, I feel a lot more relaxed because then I can go on to my second draft, which is so much better. And it's probably at second draft stage is where I start to share it around. My second lucky dip is, is your first draft typed or handwritten? To be honest, my first draft is a combination of both in that I will be scribbling down notes, but when it comes to actually writing the novel, that all goes onto the computer. And that is how I think these days. I don't tend to think in long chunks handwritten. They're more like just ideas or scrawls or a paragraph here or trying to work words out or something like that. But I work in Scrivener and I'd be lost without it. Highly recommend people checking it out if they don't use it. Well, first drafts would be the part of the process I dread the most because you're not quite sure what your novel is doing. Is it even a novel? So that, but it's like, it's that, it's the idea of running towards danger though. It is the part I dread, but it's also a part I love because I get to, as I don't plan things generally, it's a question of, well, what happens next? And I get to be the first kind of reader of it to go, I don't know either. So I need to work that out. So it also is the bit where when you suddenly make that wonderful eureka moment connections, that is just like, oh, brilliant. I see the way forward. So it has its, first drafts have their highs and their lows for me. Yes, I do read other books when I'm writing. They don't tend to be crime fiction. I do read a lot of crime fiction, but I sometimes find it's a little bit too close and I worry about their ideas bleeding onto my ideas. So I actually, when I'm writing, I intend to, I really enjoy reading books that are totally different from mine. And then you can sometimes get ideas of the actual, just the pure writing of it, like that's a beautiful sentence, or I love that metaphor. And sometimes it can spark your ideas off in a totally different way. And I really love incorporating very kind of different, not necessarily crimey ideas into the crime space. So for example, the artwork in my third book, that was a real joy for me to do because it really challenged my kind of set ideas about crime fiction and made me look at them anew. So I really enjoy books that kind of cross genres in general. Well, right now I'm reading, and it's excellent, so I thoroughly recommend people to rush out and buy it, is Margaret Atwood's essays, Burning Questions. And she's got just so many great ideas. But if I can quickly plug another book, because as a bookseller, why not? Coming out soon is Jennifer Egan's The Candy House, and it is a work of genius, sensational. So I suspect that's going to be the book of the year. And I just would suggest that people went out and either read or reread Goon Squad first to get the whole of her genius, but it's not compulsory. Just go out and read that one because it's brilliant. Well, I'm currently swimming in the ocean, throwing bits of wood together, trying to grapple a way to make a raft in book 4. And it's great fun, but I need to be a bit more disciplined and start getting a bit more words on the computer. So that is my next job to do. Thanks so much. It's been lovely to be back.